Okay, we'll call this meeting work session for the Orem City Planning Commission to order at 4:32 p.m. on April 16th, 2025 in the City Council chambers here in Orem. And we're gonna just continue our conversation for the general plan, specifically on land use elements.
I will, I'll turn the time over to Grant here in just one moment. I just wanted to, before we get into the discussion of the land use part of this again, we did send out a draft of that intro section. If you have any other edits on the draft, please send them to me. We'll get those in. So, and with that, we'll start Grant's slides.
Okay, yeah, so as we discussed last time, I will get Mike, I'll give you a copy. I just handed out copies to those who were here. But this is an updated, just general timeline, so we can be planning ahead and reflects the additional chapters that we reviewed at the very beginning. So I'll give you a copy, Mike, for a hard copy, just so we can keep remembering where we're going, and then have this just template too to kind of review where we were, what we talked about April 2nd, and then where we are today, continuing the land use element discussion, and then we'll get to a preview of next month at the end. So what we thought would be helpful for kind of continuing the discussion of the land use element, I was going to pull up the current general plan and just we can go through from the perspective of the state code requirements, what's required. So we just thought we'd review what existing goals and objectives exist currently and what could we update from those, and then also from the list that we went through last time of the overarching goals and objectives for a land use element, what's kind of missing and what would we like to additionally address for some goals and objectives. So bear with me for a second and I will pull up that web page here. No, it's okay.
Hey, Grant. Grant.
Not working?
Yeah, let me come check that really quick.
All right, let's continue for a moment. Is that still not working?
Yeah, he's gonna need a moment, but
Okay.
are you okay if we keep talking? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as we looked at this, as we look at the land use segment, the land use element, we want to define what kinds of objectives and goals ought to be part of that, ought to be part of this whole segment. what really comes out at first is just the definitions, low density, medium density, et cetera, the mapping itself. But as we look for the kind of goals and things of those of that nature, it's a little short on in that department. It gives you descriptions, et cetera, and talks about the annexation, and that's really essentially what we have. Some typical or the kinds of things that I would extrapolate from the language that's in here, just from my listings, would be, for example, objectives and goals in a land use category in a land use element might include things like providing opportunities for complementary uses to surround key areas of the city. The city park, you could talk about those things: city park, the Sarah, the mall, things like that. How do we? That gives some framework for decisions that get made as we look at different zones. So it'll do its basic work of saying these are the zones that are allowed in these areas, but what kind of goals and objectives should guide it beyond that? What kind of things will be complementary uses? And sometimes in looking at general planning, what comes out of that discussion is that we don't have a zone that would do the things that we want it to do in those areas. We don't have a zone that will create complementary uses for Sarah, for example. I don't know that we do or don't. I'm just saying that kind of thing could be the case. Does that make sense? So that's one potential goal that we've talked about: providing opportunities for complementary uses to surround key areas of the city. For example, to stimulate investment in central corridors or central areas of the city or important areas of the city. One thing we talked about, it might appear in different elements, and you can't worry about, I know for me, I started eliminating ideas because I think, well, that really belongs in this other element. Well, maybe it belongs in more than one element, and it's okay to say, we want as a goal or objective for land use to provide opportunities for stimulating investment in the central corridor, commercial corridor of the city. That can be in a couple of different elements. And do we provide for that as we look at changes? What about tech parks? We have a lot of kind of semi-suburban tech parks in the city. Flex office space at the north end of the city. Are those the appropriate uses there? Are there things we can do to spur more investment in those areas to protect that kind of commercial use? And then we have some other conversations coming up tonight about not just the commercial corridor of the city, but the Geneva Road area. That's on our list to talk about. We met with the planners at Vineyard, for example, to talk about what they're doing and what we might do on our side or if we're land use planning in the right directions on our side to capitalize on what they're doing. We need to talk about all of that. But in terms of objectives and goals, we are free floating in this current land use element. It doesn't really talk about it. It labels the different land uses and the categories, and that's pretty much all it does. So it ought to have some goals and objectives for us to lean on. Are there other things that spring to mind as we talk about this, as we go through these discussions tonight? We need to turn them into goals or objectives that we might be able to use. Any thoughts on that, or do you want to just get into more discussion?
I agree with that, but one thing that I think we're struggling with in some of our discussion is that we're kind of going broad city, broad, all these things. And
Yeah.
like you just brought up at least 4 areas in the city that we probably need to do some more fine tooth comb going through.
Sure.
And so some part of this, I do think we need to start off and say, this is the Geneva Road corridor. This is what's around it. This is North Orem. And like really, I think we're not going to make much progress on some of these areas unless we really start focusing. I get that we need broad principles, but we
Sure.
need to, I don't even think we could say for certain on some of those until we actually look and say, hey, I mean, we've looked around the tech park a lot, but if we want to protect the tech park, what does that really mean for the land use around it?
Sure.
And stuff like
Sure.
that. So I think we need to make sure that we're pulling it in and saving some time to start really
Drilling down.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't disagree with that, but I worry that if we don't have the broad principles.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. We need
Yeah.
those first, but we
Okay.
need to leave time also to
Oh,
get
sure.
down into being more specific, and we
Yeah.
need to work more specifically.
How granular actually do
Should
you
the
plan
general
on
plan-
getting with this, I guess is my question.
In an individual year for an update, not too granular, if
Yeah.
I can. But then it's an interesting point, and a really important one. Sometimes what may come out of some of those broader principles is an identification of an area that might need a plan of its own, right?
Right.
So it's legitimate to say in this land use element, one of the subsections is key areas for small area plans or identified small area plans. Maybe we need a tech park and it doesn't have to be area bound either. Like Gary's talked about before, or mentioned before, as we look at the city and places that might redevelop or might further develop residentially, what do we want those to look like? Do we want to just take a moment and say, as those areas redevelop or come up for development, they should be brought into at least an R8 zoning as a minimum? We don't want it, we're not looking for, there's been talk about it, we're not looking for more PRDs in these eastern vacant parcels, just to keep developers from wasting their time in looking at a situation that we're not going to have a pocket of higher density development surrounded by a lot of R8, R10, R12. So some of those kinds of principles can be broad, and maybe that needs more study too. Maybe we're not ready to say granularly how that would work, but we should at least identify that it needs to be discussed, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
But I think the needs, especially if we're talking about, we may need some finer grained commercial districts or
Sure.
finer grained, whatever. What we do on Geneva is not going to be the same that we do over there. And so
Right.
taking a little bit of time to really orient and say, okay, what's going on developmentally here?
Yeah.
Like
That
I said,
makes
I don't want it to derail because we could get down into the nitty gritty and never move on.
Right.
But at the same time, we need to have a balanced idea. Like it needs to make sense.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think that that's been an issue with planning in the past in our city, is that we've made these broad strokes that didn't actually make sense when you broke it down to each of the major corridors along
Yeah.
State Street or whatever.
Yeah. I could see that. Sure.
I feel like Mike
Other
needs to
thoughts?
say something, but you don't? Okay.
Well, I just have the thought about, sorry, my throat's been bad for a couple weeks. When we're talking commercial, just about the bleed into the residential too, I think that's
Mhm.
something we need to make sure we focus on. Make it clear that, while we want your commercial, we need to respect the neighborhoods and we're not going to turn all the side streets into your transportation corridors.
Those are. Yeah, that's a good point too. These are all things that can be written in. What I think really what we're looking for is, does that kind of, this segment will be significantly differently formatted to talk about goals and objectives, broad and leading to more defined ones. Those are just kind of the first examples that we have to talk about.
Absolutely.
Supporting those areas and looking at.
I like your point about, being the focus of R8 or bigger is what we're shooting for. PDs are not really what we're searching for type thing, but, not shutting them out completely, but this isn't the focus of what we do in here.
Sure.
And I do think the idea of adding goals and objectives to this makes a lot of sense, because I agree with you. You read it now, it's like, okay, these are definitions,
Sure.
but how does that apply? What does it look like?
Yeah.
What are we going to be doing? So
What do you all think about the idea of having this segment or this element identify areas for further study that might be needed? Like those corridors that ought to get their own plans eventually at some point, or finer grain. Does that make sense?
yeah.
I was gonna just say
Yeah, great,
that
yeah.
sounds like some goals and objectives to me.
Yeah.
If we're talking about broadly from the broad general plan update perspective, what we've all done at the little discussion here has, I think, called out a few goals and objectives for the general plan. One of those being, a goal could be, we recognize and see a need for a differentiation of focus for small area studies of this corridor, this corridor, this corridor. The residential focus could be in these key areas. We want to do a deeper dive as far as studying the future infill zoning around in the existing neighborhoods. And that's a great goal and objective. And then, objective, and then the goal from that could be that future study
Mhm.
in those key areas. If you have anything else to add to that?
No.
Okay, good.
Okay, so apologize to Jerry. I think he's making do. Can you hear me? Can you hear me a little bit? A little bit, okay. Okay, I apologize, Jerry. Want to make sure you're able to participate and contribute. Um, okay, so we reviewed, let me go back to the slides here. Okay, and then I think we wanted to, I guess, return back to your, I guess, land use map review, kind of looking through the existing land use map. Maybe this kind of tails off of this initial discussion we've had about this differentiation of future studies, but also some these broader goals and objectives for the entire, perspective of the land use element. So let me pull back to this land use map. Okay. So, and of course, this is the 2018 version, but kind of identifying and looking through this, is there any specific area you want me to zoom in, at least at this point, for the beginning, kind of just to start this discussion? Any where area we could just zoom in and start talking about? Obviously, this will be a little bit grainy. I apologize. It's not higher resolution. Might be.
I thought actually that our our desire to talk about the Geneva Road corridor a little bit might be a good catalyst for that kind of conversation.
I was gonna say, if
Because-
you talked to Vineyard,
Yeah.
because that was one of the things they were thinking. I think that would be a great micro place to.
We had a
Focus.
good conversation with the planners from Vineyard, and I think that might be like a way to lead into this conversation. There's only a few places in the city where it really may not match up, and we want to see if the things that we're doing there are adequate or appropriate or whatever. And it's a good kind of microcosm of the situation. Should we talk about that a little bit? We'll recap the meeting we had and fill you in a little bit. And my phone will vibrate through the microphone. That'll be great. Everybody loves that. Yeah, that'll show it illustrated pretty well. So you guys had asked in the last meeting we had about the time of Utah City and all that kind of
Yeah,
thing. So-
I was going to ask you about,
Yeah.
Vineyard has some carefully detailed plans for
Yeah.
their growth then?
They have a series of master plans in that area along the other side of Geneva Road from us. So I'll Grant, do you want to recap the meeting kind of, or their thoughts about it?
When did you meet with them and,
Just,
Yesterday.
it feels like
Really?
48 hours ago, but I think it was just yesterday.
okay, really? Because claims have been made that Vineyard has had no planning, but you would take issue with that based on your meeting with them.
I would, yeah, didn't sound like that to me. But
Yeah, they actually identified that some of the original members of the town council a few years ago recognized and appreciated the need for future planning, and that a concept of a downtown was originally part of that initial planning from the outset. And the timing of that I can't represent from the meeting, but just that desire and recognition of the value of what was there already, and they identified as part of the resulting now of the plans that have come together now. Some of those ideas started out many years ago. And so, though it's shifted and changed, obviously with the concept of Utah City now and the plan that has taken shape as that, they identified that was an early priority for the future of Vineyard, that the members of that planning, they refer to them as the town council or something like that.
Yeah.
And that team that they had established those very early. And then obviously since they've made different changes to plans and priorities. And it has kind of grown legs, as you might say, for the plan that's in place, with quite a strong healthcare sector coming in as planned as part of this plan. Huntsman Cancer Institute just broke ground recently, and they represented there's some additional biotechnical and medical concentration that's going to be a part of that future planning. And so That's, I think, literally, not literally, but in a way, right across the street from Geneva Road and Orem. So I think that's something to consider with that future. I think they did share that the downtown is more western, on the western edge of the plannings, in this kind of area right here, more towards the lake. And so it seemed to me that it kind of tapered down to some more commercial uses along Geneva Road. And so I think that's something else to consider, that in a way up here where there is regional commercial and those warehouses, it's more that would kind of match somewhat with what we have now. Of course, we say, hey, in 30, 40 years, is there going to be desire to change that? Okay, maybe so, maybe not. And then, with what we have here for the current general plan and or consideration for future, what, if anything, could stay the same, or could we consider different type of land use classification to encourage or I don't know, allow additional uses in this area to benefit from what's coming. We know what's coming, and in a way.
It seemed to me that your meeting with them would be very important because we want to work hand in hand. And I guess we do compete with them in trying to attract certain types of businesses that would be an asset to our respective communities.
Yeah.
Did they request they meet with you, or did you request you meet with them?
We
How did that come
requested
up?
the meeting.
We requested the meeting just kind of following from your encouragement. In the past, we have had prior meetings, and they identified that, a few years ago, they twice a year would try to meet together and coordinate with the staff to staff as far as long-term priorities they did share that when we get to the point in the future of the timeline, right, that we reviewed earlier, as we're ready to maybe discuss some more transportation focused planning, that we could meet with their engineers who are kind of, have updated their transportation master plan and focus on some of those key transportation elements that are going to be, we share Geneva Road, and so what's the future of that? How can we coordinate? Because they identified as part of their general plan, and that's really critical as part of their master plans as well, as some trail systems, trail networks, and some loops, and along Geneva Road, some trails in the future. And I think it would be cross beneficial for Orem to say, hey, how can we, tie into those so that our residents can go to the lake and link up to those trail networks, and then vice versa. How can Vineyard residents also connect with our trails that are connect to other trails, right? And so that's an example, I think, of some. They shared some examples of what those would look like, and we could say, okay, we have already actually in the past also coordinated on that for 8th North, for example, where we're zoomed in right here on this map. There's a trail that comes down 8th North, and we've been focusing on coordinating that junction of 8th North and Geneva Road for a seamless connection to that trail along 8th North, down all the way to the lake. So it was a really good, encouraging meeting to hear, and they were excited to continue the collaboration and meeting with us in the future. As we say, we'll definitely want to meet with you again here in the next few months to continue talking about these crossover connections that I think make sense. So
That's great.
Where's the trail on 800 North?
Do you want to zoom in?
I think Matt can, Matt's much more of a trail expert than I am, but how far is it? Do you remember how far it goes right now, Matt, on the 800 North? Sorry to put you on the spot.
The 800 North multi-use trail that exists in Orem, it does It's a buffered trail system. It has 10 feet of concrete, and then there's a planter strip for most of distance between the canyon and where the Provo River Trailhead is there on 8th North to Geneva Road. Now, when it hits certain pockets, there's a couple gaps. And there's a gap by the hospital that we're working on, and right next to that, it still has a 4 or 5 foot sidewalk in those areas. And then once you pass the freeway, there is no buffer. Okay, so it's not 100% complete, but it is something that's on our radar. We were considering going for some grant money this year to try and finish a section by the hospital. That will probably be put off till next year, though. And then when it goes into Vineyard, originally they only had one multi-use trail, but their latest amendment, we asked them to consider making sure they plan for a connection, and they've actually planned for a multi-use trail on both sides of that continuation of 800 North down into their downtown area, and then that connects into quite an extensive trail network throughout their community, and also the Utah Lake.
So their downtown area would be at 800 North then, north of our
Well,
800
you can see
North?
it there, Grant. It sort of curves
Yeah,
up,
it's
and
right
then
up
it's
here.
north of that curved area.
If you could see my cursor.
I can, yeah.
And then they had represented too that there would be kind of a loop that would, I don't know where their front runner station is right now, off the top of my head.
It's a little
It's a little
further.
up here.
Yeah.
Isn't it right here?
Do you know what the population of Vineyard is currently? Did they,
16,000?
it's what?
16,000?
16.
Yeah, the front runner station's right here. So they were gonna say there's a loop that's gonna connect over to the station and then continue through. I believe there's a future UVU extension campus right here. UVU is working with them to do some connections there. And then I think there's gonna be a green, kind of a green greenway. And they have some good parks over here. They represented also, there's some park space along Geneva Road that would be, that's also future planned. And so those, the idea on their side is that if there's a multi-use trail along Geneva, that would be one element of that. And then it would tie into some existing park networks, and then this future greenway and paths through the campus that they're working with UVU on. And then the medical campus will also have some.
And where's this Utah City going to be?
I believe Utah City, as they represent it,
there.
it's
It's
kind of
a
this
whole-
entire
Yeah.
block here, and then a small portion
Grant.
down here.
The area that we described as their downtown is Utah City. The area east of the railroad tracks is additional UVU campus
Okay, thank you.
and some more flex and commercial space, more traditional suburban style.
So I got they have a Utah City plan, and they have that's part of the, included in their overarching station area plan, which I believe encompasses most of this area. So I got those two mixed up. So I think, yeah, there's existing network that we have that is along Geneva Road as well. And we have there's a trail along the marshlands here that goes up to the Vineyard along the lake. That's going to tie in down here. Trying to remember specifically. So I think there's some encouraging networks that we're, as a city, we've already established that as we mentioned, those could be cross connections and, an overarching network. But back to the land use, I think they've identified so many units, residential units that are gonna be a part of their future downtown and part of But then also there's the campus and what we've talked about already, medical biotech. And then they also represented that as they've had discussions and talks with the medical industry, you know, coming in, there's going to be just associated uses with those industries that are going to also want to be close by. And I think that's something that we could definitely have as an objective and a goal review, like we've talked, a review of this corridor and specifically for kind of addressing that in the future.
Are those going to be commercial needs? Are those going to be manufacturing, industrial needs? Are those?
That's part of the conversation we need to
Okay.
have. So as Grant's gonna make that less opaque, more transparent, you can see our side, so on the Vineyard side, they're building new stuff because it was empty. That's always the
Right.
easiest. It's just greenfield development. You do what you want. The west side of the freeway going down to Geneva Road has been industrial in Orem. It's been the west side industrial development. You have storage units, you have some warehousing and things like that. But there's opportunities in that redevelopment to do more with that, to boost our commercial base, our employment base and things. And the question really becomes, as we look at what they're doing on their side or what they plan to do on their side, their general plan for their whole side is mixed use, and UVU has its own university category, et cetera, and they're planning on bringing in some of these medical elements like Grant's talking about. Are there things that we need to do? Is the industrial land use category going to serve us well enough to capitalize on what they do on their side? If we want to bring in, if we see industries coming in to serve those areas, or other service providers coming in to serve those areas, or do we want to focus on biotech that wants to be near the hospitals that come in, or things like that? We don't know, but that's something we need to talk about. Is industrial going to serve us well enough, or do we need a different category? Do we say it can be regional, commercial, and industrial, depending on what grows first? Utah City and this kind of growth that they're talking about is going to be 30 years before it's all done.
Mhm.
So will our side. Our redevelopment will be even slower and probably messier, to be honest. As you're redeveloping things, everything gets more complicated, everything gets more messy. But we need to capitalize on it, right?
You know, you wonder, the medical stuff that's coming into Vineyard, is that because of invitation, or was that something that the medical organizations came to them with a request that they be able to do something there?
It's growing population, proximity to the rail station, and a lot of coordination probably as well, yeah. But it's the anticipation of that growth and the proximity to the rail. So that attracts things like that. And then you approach a place and say, we have this available, or a big developer approaches them, like somebody like Woodbury has relationships with different medical users. Say, we could build medical here too. And they all thrive when there's people that are captive waiting for services, go get hamburgers and go shop or whatever. They need hotels, they need everything. And so it's good. Medical land itself winds up being, there's trade-offs. You take 150 acres for a big medical campus and it's all nonprofit and you don't get any property tax from it. So you hope that what it brings in besides that is good enough to warrant having given up those 150 acres. It's a real challenge sometimes, but hospitals generate a lot of activity and it's good to have medical. People like living near medical services. So there you
They
go.
also drive up the cost of living when you bring in too much of that stuff
Yeah,
and take away the average Joe industries.
sure. And that's another question that I always have as I look at general plans. You have to be careful, and I know it feels like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but you don't want to give up all of your just industrial land. These industries are real. They're still using space. They need access to the freeway. They have access to rail and they like that. So we have to consider all of those things. It shouldn't be the intent to simply push out industry out of every city that starts to redevelop. If it's legitimate and it's serving your interests, it's bringing in employment, it's doing all those things. Maybe what we need to do is be able to, when they need to evolve as an industry, when they need more space or they need less space and they want to redevelop other parts, we need to have opportunities for them to stay afloat, to stay alive. How do you modernize? What do they need in modernization? I don't know. But I want to be able to give it to them if they want to stay and modernize.
We also have our public facilities down in that area.
Yeah. There's
Which
a lot of,
we've already moved once
yeah.
because it used to be where Winco was.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it would seem to me that you'd want to keep your options open without being too restrictive, I don't know. You have to make some hard decisions about what type of enterprises you want to be domiciled in a certain part of your community.
Sure.
I mean, how do you know?
Yeah,
We don't have a crystal ball, right? Like, we don't
We
have
don't.
the ability, and so it's setting up sound principles.
Yeah,
Is kind of the basics of what generally do we want to encourage and see develop
Yeah.
here.
yeah, that would be correct.
yeah.
But I mean, if we're talking, I'm sorry, am I?
No,
are you
you're
done?
good.
Are you done?
No.
No, but like essentially when it comes to Vineyard and their development, we're looking between 8th and 16th in our city. We're looking at those corridors because that's where everybody's going to be coming through to go to I-15.
Yes.
Mountain View, or whatever it's called, Lakeview, I always get it mixed up. They'll have another north-south Lakeview. Thank you.
Well, this is the road that's by the lake.
Yeah, they'll have another north-south, but it won't be the same as getting to I-15. And so all of that traffic's gonna come through those corridors.
Yeah.
And so on some levels, it's like, okay, what should be on those corridors, especially if 8th North is really supposed to be a connection of a trail from the canyon to the lake. I think that's also something that we have to consider and say,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, a
Yeah.
lot of the traffic that comes out of Vineyard are people that are just passing through Orem, it
Sure.
seems to me. If they're going to Provo and they can't get on the freeway and without going clear to South Provo, then what do? Go up Center Street or what, 4th South coming from
Yeah.
Vineyard? And I live in an area where I've seen the impact of that traffic coming through.
Yeah.
And it's quite significant.
And
I don't know what future plans there are to mitigate that issue.
that's the hard thing is we can plan on our side, but that's where we wanted to meet with Vineyard and see what we're dealing with because we can't control what happens on the Vineyard side. So we can try to keep traffic from growing with activities that we undertake. But when Vineyard puts 2,000 rooftops in, well, that generates traffic. And like Grant said, we share that road. We have to plan for, in our master transportation planning or in our transportation element, we have to plan for that growth. Because even if it comes on the other side, it comes and we have to deal with it. I think what we do to capitalize on those rooftops, if we're not putting in those rooftops ourselves, what we want to do is be able to capitalize on them. We want people that live there to work in places in Orem, that in the industries that are there. We want people that live there to recreate in Orem and spend some of their dollars in Orem and feel like they're part of an area. Some areas it shouldn't, and it doesn't. I mean, realistically, it doesn't matter to people if the holiday oil they stop at to get their drink and popcorn at 8 in the morning, and I've eaten lots of popcorn at 8 in the morning, so don't judge me. It doesn't matter to them what city it's in. It just happens. So like you say, we don't have a crystal ball. We want to keep our options open, but at the same time, we want to make sure it's not just a free-for-all and that what we're really trying to do in the general plan, and especially with these land use elements, is encourage the right things, the things that we think will be the best. And maybe all that's needed is, maybe it can just stay industrial as the land use category. If we write into the land use category's description that we can consider X and Y and Z, if it does these certain goals or meets these certain goals. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense.
and I think that's where we were talking last time about maybe mixed use commercial industrial.
Yeah,
That I think if we capitalize on some of that and some of that flexibility
I love that.
and create that into it, then it doesn't matter if we leave 8th North the way it is, but then another grocery store wants to come in or another gas station or whatever, we can make that.
We can make it work. I like that idea
Work.
a lot. Is that a category that anyone has any thoughts about or?
Well, I would point out that just about everything on Geneva, they have storefronts all the way down and they're not really tied to any of the commercial stuff, the
Yeah.
industrial stuff behind them.
Yeah,
Most of them don't have roadways back in. There are a couple, but
Hmm.
most of them that face Geneva are just small little businesses already.
yeah,
You're talking from the east side of Geneva.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all It's
on the
all-
east side.
it's
Old-
storefront.
open land on Vineyard side
Yeah.
there, except where they're building all those houses. I mean, they're butting apartments up to Geneva Road.
Right.
So, this, our retail or commercial will just face somebody's backyard. That's the way they're
Yeah.
building it out.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Vineyard can make that choice. I mean, I don't think we're gonna like suddenly declare this whole section residential. I think that, I mean, obviously that I'm being absurd
Well,
on purpose, but how do we take
the
what
one
they're
point
doing
I'd
on one
make
side?
is if you turn it commercial, you're gonna exacerbate the traffic problem.
On Geneva Road or on the
Yeah,
side?
because now
Solidly.
everybody's going in and out, stopping and shopping, and people who don't normally travel it are now traveling it to get to a store.
Yeah.
And
Was
I'd
it-
argue the only places that I think,
It's Hegelian dialect. Let's create a problem so we can fix it the way we want, right?
but I think like if we were looking commercial and saying, oh, and again, this is just hypothetical. Like, I think right along 8th makes sense because people are gonna be going back and forth there anyways.
Anyway,
Not
and-
necessarily turning the whole block between 16th and 8th into commercial.
But areas around those cross streets maybe make more sense because you're going to get the traffic Mike's talking about regardless. So that's where you want to maybe capitalize. We'll take a look at that and draft some stuff up. I think that would make some sense. Does that work for everybody?
But I think really the mixed idea makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think so too.
I guess it's also kind of hard. It's like generally what is there now?
Does Vineyard expect to keep the same pace of growth that they've had in the past? I can't imagine that they would. It seems like,
It's lulling a little bit.
it just seems like all of us overnight, just
Yeah.
all of these places were built and occupied and
I didn't get the sense from them yesterday, and you guys can tell me if you got a different sense, but I didn't get the sense from them that they thought it would halt really or stop, but everything
Yeah.
is slowing down a little bit. You see
Yeah.
that, but it always comes
come
back with a
yeah.
vengeance. So yeah, no, they are master planned for it. Their transportation is planned for it. They're expecting thousands of households. So we have to be ready in that area.
We're also going to be dealing with a lot of student housing in that area within a few years. And so that's a lot of people, a lot of traffic. And of course, the bike pathways and so forth that they're planning is helpful, but
Yeah.
it's something we need to take into account is there are going to be a lot of students who need maybe places to
So
work
would the students
and so forth.
be students that, you say there's going to be a bit of a satellite UVU campus?
Yeah, there are, and there's going to be
So
actual housing
what is
that they
it, 2
create
miles
there.
away from where they currently are?
I'm sorry, they're creating housing in Vineyard, but they will not put housing in Orem
No, what I'm saying is
or
that
just
there'll be
ancillary people.
student, there'll be
moving.
student housing right next to the university.
But
that they're
UVU isn't
building
gonna
there.
create it. It will be commercial student housing.
They have a private person coming in to build those structures on, and they're leasing the land right next to the university is how they're
But
going to be doing
The
it.
proposed university,
But-
not the one that exists?
Yeah, the proposed one. in
So
Vineyard.
pseudo
Sorry.
student.
Those
So
cla-
pseudo student housing. I'm sorry, this has just been an ongoing
Right.
issue in Orem about the fact that.
I just want to make a
UV
clarification.
Yeah, please clarify.
Not to,
Because
not
I'm
to
trying to
speak
clarify.
over Grace, but I think they were accurate in representing that is still in development as far as the plan itself and the logistics of what that
Mhm.
looks like has not been finalized yet.
Interesting.
I don't know if you had anything, Matt?
I just get the impression we've been asking for years.
Just saying clarification, this is
Yeah.
very preliminarily, they're considering housing, they're not sure who they partner with, they don't have anything lined up or even plans drawn up yet, it's just sort of
But how much of a
conceptual.
campus is that going to be? I mean, that sounds like a totally separate campus from the main.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how the two campuses work in concert with each other, but it'll be a large campus, it's gonna be, almost the same size, what did they say, 120 acres versus 180 or something, I can't remember
100 and
exactly.
what?
Almost as big.
Really large, and that, again, that's preliminary, like there's
Acres.
acres.
180
Campus
acres.
for the,
In
so
North
it's a
Orange. I mean,
significant
North Linden,
extension.
Vineyard,
Yeah.
rather.
UVU is already the largest student population in
Yeah.
the state. They're apparently trying to be the largest student population
In the
in
world.
the
Yeah.
I guess
Makes sense
Makes
too, to
sense.
put
That's
it
the
right
point.
in the most, the smallest pocket of the entire I-15 corridor.
It's just kind of the irony of the
Yeah.
universe.
So when is
word,
that, how soon is that going to
Again,
begin?
yeah.
I hope?
We don't know.
They
No, I wouldn't expect I wouldn't, just knowing where they're at is probably 10 years before they
yeah.
break ground on any housing.
But 180 acres, that's
Yeah,
big.
it's a big campus they're
That
planning,
is.
and that might get whittled down as time goes, who knows?
That's
But
right
that's-
by Utah City, sounds like,
Yeah, it'll
right?
be part of it.
Part of it, okay. Huh.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Just because we have our own you know, the neighborhood and everything that's happened in Orem that, I mean, I think they do need student housing. And are they essentially trying to connect? I don't know if you know the answer to this, but if you do, are they essentially trying to use Front Runner as the connection between the two campuses?
I don't know. It didn't,
It will practically function like that.
Interesting. Well, that's something to keep in mind. It does make.
okay.
It's about 3 miles.
So can I make one more point or
Yeah.
just so we
Yeah.
can, as we.
You can make two if you'd like.
Two? I probably just need the one, really.
We're not stingy here.
Just so we don't run out of time, but this is the kind of thing that I think will probably make sense for us. The position that Orem is in its sort of life cycle. It seems to me, as we talk about it as staff and as we think about it, that our general plan this year might make more sense as we're making these kinds of modifications, identifying areas that would be in flux or should be prepared for change, and how we want to direct that through the general plan. And it will be pretty broad, but it could identify things in the future. So this Geneva Road corridor could be the kind of model where a similar kind of thing might be needed on the north end of the city in that area we talked about with the border with Linden. It's a little more stable there. We're probably expecting the most impact from another city from Vineyard in the next 10, 20 years.
So you mean, I'm gonna get a little sarcastic here,
Sure.
we might actually want to get ahead of the power curve?
That would be a
Maybe
great
just a
idea.
little bit.
I think it would be a great idea
What?
to try to make it, respond to its obvious kind of impacts. So
No, I agree with you.
we
That's
can,
the goal.
we can look at it that way.
Yeah, no, but I think we need to be, right?
And
Hey,
some things,
Totally
oh, go
with
ahead,
you.
Grant.
Yeah, if I could just,
Yeah.
I mean, we've already done some studies along that corridor. Obviously, they're dated and obviously they were from one perspective and one facility, you know, but that exists and maybe that could also be informative for this objective of getting ahead of this curve and saying, okay, what is this? What was studied before? What was the resulting, you know, evaluation from those studies? Is there anything of merit there that is part of the discussion now? Maybe it's completely shifted and changed, or maybe the direction we want with what we learned from Vineyard, continue to learn from Vineyard and know about as their plan develops, maybe that's completely different. And so, but just to remind you that exists and we can kind of take that as a body of knowledge and pull from it as well.
Thank you. I think it was helpful that we drilled down and talked about one specific area to kind of start saying, okay. And I agree. I think it may be that we just literally go through and say, maybe we need to study UVU on our side and Geneva and the mall and University Parkway and residential commercial areas where they abut. And like, these are all things that we need to really focus on next year.
I really liked that they had, I really liked that they had in their general plan a category for the university that they're expecting. We might consider something like that based on that kind of language.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that in terms of maybe like on the map, making
Yeah.
the university its own separate.
Yep. Yeah.
Own separate thing on the map.
So it gives us, like you said, Madam Chairwoman, it gives us a method at least to approach these other areas, and that lets us start to draft what might work or what we think might be acceptable for you all. So we can bring that back to you next time, and we'll expand beyond the Geneva Road example into the other areas because we're going to run out of time to really do much more. But we'll expand beyond that with that same method. Look at some of the language that we could add to the categories themselves, where we might only need language added to open them up a little bit to respond better to the things that happen around them, and then areas that might need different designations entirely based on this kind of model. Does that make sense? Okay.
What are these green squares?
Those are parks. For some reason on our map, the one that's automatically on mine anyway, my linked version. Yeah, that layer is always on. When we pull up my Orem where I live map, it thinks I want to know where all the parks are for.
Well, depending on your housing situation, it may be the
Yeah.
most important thing,
Not
right?
bad.
Yeah.
It's never what I'm looking for when someone calls and says, can I turn my house into a duplex? But it's there always when I need it. So, okay, I'll let, should we get back to the slides and see if there's anything else we
Yeah,
need to
I was gonna
cover
say.
before
Okay, so we covered those. That's what we're going to kind of suggest. And then next steps, we'll draft, as Jared's mentioned, we'll draft these land use element chapter following this comments and discussion we've had. The May 7th meeting will review some of that draft and additional commentary. And then we'll begin redevelopment discussion.
That one might be a little brutal to get through all of that land use draft and then start redevelopment. So I don't think the meeting will be particularly heavy or heinous. So that might be one where we want to go back into work session after, if that's all right. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think we probably will need that.
We're
And
gonna,
then will we be able to get online access?
yes, the IT department worked out a way for me to do it. But then they started moving all the computers, like literally the day after.
Yeah.
And they were like, and they sent out a big thing saying, if you have any requests that's not moving computers, don't bother right now. And so now they're almost done moving computers, and I'll be able to get it done. So in the next draft that we want to send out, I'll be able to share with you, not in the way that I did the intro, but just as a shared document in the drive. So
Just checking on that. But I
Yep.
mean, we understand that everything's in flux. and
IT just
transition.
got really put upon it right after they figured out a way for me to do it. So,
I'm sure that is a lot of work for them.
yeah, they're
To
busy.
move to the new building, so.
Well, we may need to consider doing the 14th for another meeting too, if we're running short on time.
Oh, as
An additional meeting.
an additional meeting, as a work session?
Yeah.
We could consider that. Well, let's talk about that
It's
at the
more
May 7th.
important to get it done than it is to
Yeah.
get it done, you know.
Yeah,
I don't want to skip things just because we're running out of time
I agree.
type
Agree.
stuff.
When do we move into the new building, actually? What's the latest on that?
Gary, do you want to speak to that? I'm hearing the open house is on Tuesday next week, the 22nd. So the open house is next week on Tuesday. And I think we start functioning for real out of it the next day. We're kind of back and forth right now. A lot of our stuff is over there, but public's still coming to this building instead for questions about things and to pay for their licenses, et cetera. You guys' next meeting, the next meeting of the planning commission should be in the new building. This should be the last meeting that you have in this room, because we won't meet again until May 7th. And unless barring some kind of big catastrophe or electromagnetic pulse, we'll be at the new building.
And I just put up this tours, if you want us for a tour, there's guided tours that we've arranged.
okay. Well, thank you. Then we will adjourn until our regularly scheduled meeting at 5:30.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I never asked you, but
Okay, we'll call this session of the Orem City Planning Commission to order at 5:33 PM on April 16th, 2025 in the Orem City Council Chambers, and we will begin with an invocation by Jerry.
Our Father in heaven, as we meet in as a planning commission today, we pray that thou will be with us and guide us, that we might make decisions that are beneficial to the city, to keep us being indeed Family City, USA. We pray that thy Spirit will be with us. We are grateful to live in this city. We're grateful for the people of the city. We're grateful for the opportunity to serve. And this we do in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, we will begin with item 3, which is our consent agenda items. We'll begin, which includes item 3.1, which is our meeting minutes for March 19th, 2025. Item 3.2, our meeting minutes from April 2nd, 2025. Item 3.3, Apple Point preliminary plat located generally at 230 East, 2000 South. Item 3.4, Bishop Estates preliminary plat located generally at 526 North, 400 East. Item 3.5, Orem Center for Change preliminary plat located generally at 1748 North State Street. Item 3.6, Schellenberger preliminary plat located generally at 1331 South, 1000 East. And item 3.7, which is Sunflower Dunes preliminary plat located generally at 1450 South, 360 West. Are there any questions or any items people want removed from the consent agenda? Okay, then do we have a motion on the consent agenda items?
I move that we approve the items on the consent agenda.
Second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Jim moved, Rod seconded that we approve the consent agenda items. Jim, vote?
Aye.
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 Okay. Those items are approved. And then we will move on to item 4.1, which is the neighborhood meeting text amendments, which we've continued from our previous meetings. Thank you all who came for your items. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord.
So item 4.1, the text amendment about the neighborhood meetings, modifies these two articles, 221420I, 2215G. And we have talked about it a few times just to go over the things that are remaining. It does, some of these things are new and some of them are older, but just to recap what it will do now as a final ordinance amendment. No meetings would be held or scheduled after 6 on, or they would always be held after 6 on weeknights or after 9 a.m. on Saturdays, not on holidays or the day after or before a holiday, not on the same night as city council or a planning commission meeting. The proposal has to be noticed or has to be described in the notice, and another meeting might be required. A couple other things. The notice distance we talked about. Notice to property owners within 2,000 feet for rezone requests and 1,000 feet for commercial site plans. Just to note that the notice distance is measured from the subject property, the way that we do it with GIS, that we give them the lists. It measures the outside of that, or identifies the outside of whatever the subject property is, and measures from there. So it's not like a door-to-door thing. It is the property a little bit expanded. We had a discussion about noticing only 500 feet for smaller lot adjustments and things. Those don't require notices. They're exempted from the neighbor notice deal already, so I've removed that part of the discussion. Notice timing, we talked about. Notices need to be postmarked at least 21 calendar days prior to the meeting. Is that still, that's what we talked about, right? Just making sure I got my notes right. So that's what we've written in. Then also the notice content. We've written in this draft to say that your notice has to use the template that we provide. That template does a few things. On the front side, it gives you a greeting and what to expect. It tells you where and when it's going to happen. It gives the applicant's contact information. Then we would include right here a vicinity map showing, kind of highlighting the property and around it. So you can kind of identify, oh, there's the school. I know where that is. Now I know what property we're talking about. A data table at the bottom repeats some of the information from the top because some people are naturally attracted to anything that's in a table. So we figured that'll get them the contact information again and that location, and then the description box of what they're asking to do, what they're planning to do. And then the reverse side would be their concept plan or whatever it might be. So we'll give them that template to use. Then another meeting requirement would be that they provide a roster of attendance. Again, the form to be provided by the city. It'll include a line for their name and contact, and then a space for them to make a comment if they want, if they don't want to speak, or if they just want the comment associated with their name. An explanation of the presentation and proposal needs to be given at the meeting. So they can't just say, it's the meeting, say what you want to say. You present the item, tell them what you want to do. Meeting minutes, also in a form to be provided by the city. We're going to have a fillable form made up like that. And then a notice that additional meetings would be required if the concept changes. Or if they, again, the language says something about if you held this meeting just to get a temperature of the neighborhood about what they like or whatever, and didn't present a concept, that's not really this neighborhood meeting, doesn't count for it. Those are the things that we have written into the neighbor notice at this point. If you're comfortable with moving that on to the city council with our recommendation, we can do that. If you want anything else changed, we're open to suggestions.
Like,
I have one more comment on
Sure.
your holiday thing,
Yeah,
not holding them on a Saturday before a holiday on Monday. Most people take off for that 3-day weekend.
I see what you mean. So like if it's
Yeah.
not, that's technically not the day before the holiday, but it's
Right.
really the day before the holiday.
Right, because we allow
Yeah.
Saturdays, so if there's a holiday on Monday,
Yeah.
that Saturday doesn't count.
Yeah, we can make that change.
Because most people leave on Friday or
If that's
really early on Saturday.
if that's an acceptable amendment to make for everybody, we can make that and still move it on.
Yeah.
Would that work for you? We can also bring it back again too. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
We're not in a hurry.
Let me ask a question. I mean, these are wonderful suggestions. Are there things that you that have had a lot of experience in dealing with this sort of a thing that are being missed? I mean, you've asked our input, but
Yeah.
let me turn it back.
No, I think this kind of covers, I've kind of given it as we go. I think this kind of covers what you want to get. Developers are an interesting bunch of people as they make proposals to do things. They'll give the information that you tell them to give people, but they're not going to give a lot more necessarily on their own. So I think the templates are a great idea. I think the roster is a good idea. It gives, the main point of all of this, and I think it's, from my experience as well, the important part is to get what happens in that meeting transmitted to you all as a commission so it means something. So it wasn't just held and they move on. Does that make sense?
Totally.
I think in that way, this really drills down to that.
So you think it's been covered? You
Yeah, I think it's been covered well.
And the rest of you feel the same way, I guess? Nod your heads if you agree. Smile if you agree. Grant, you don't agree. You weren't smiling.
He chose the nodding option.
And Matt's over here. Matt, are you in agreement? Well, you agreed to donate $500 to the next party we've scheduled.
I think this looks great. I think you've done great. This is gonna be good changes. We've made great strides to make sure people are informed, have the opportunity to speak up, which is really
You've
the
done
important
great.
part.
A lot of your suggestions here.
I don't know. As
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, I'd rather see this sooner than later. So unless there's other items related to this we think we want to add or adjust, I think the work Rebecca's done and that you all as staff have done has been fabulous to get us to something that I think will be more beneficial for us and for the community.
Yeah.
So,
I agree.
We'll add the language about the Saturday before Monday holiday, meaning the day before the meeting as well, not counting. So.
So with that, I move that with the additions proposed by Jared, that we approved the text amendment to forward to the city council.
okay, do I have a second?
I second that.
Okay.
Aye.
I didn't even ask
You
for
were
a
looking
vote
at,
yet.
I
No.
read your eyes.
I don't think anyone has anything to say, but I was gonna give people an opportunity if there was anything else to be said. You cleared your throat. No.
That's because I have a frog in it.
I know. Okay. So if nobody has anything to say, we'll go to vote, and I'm gonna start with Rod.
Yeah.
Rod,
Aye.
Jerry? To
I
forward a,
don't like-
oh, I should have said that. Rod moved and Jim seconded, hey, hold on. Rod moved and Jim seconded that we forward a positive recommendation. No, was it a positive?
Yeah,
Yeah, a positive recommendation of the text changes to city council
With the proposed amendment.
with the proposed amendment that we add the Saturday before a holiday as a stipulation. So Rod voted yes. You voted yes. Yes, he said yes.
Sometimes that only comes to me.
It's good. C is acceptable. Mike,
Because it's for cookie. Yes.
yes, aye.
yes. The
All right.
planning, the motion passes and we will forward on a positive recommendation for that text amendment to city
Thank you.
council.
Thank you very much.
Before things get more absurd, do you have anything to say, Gary?
No, actually, we covered it earlier
Okay.
about the move and
Move. Okay,
things, so.
excellent. Then if there's no further business, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I second that.
Okay, Mike moved, Jim seconded that we adjourn. Rod?
Aye.
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 Okay, the meeting is,
Nay.
meeting is adjourned at
Thank you very
5:44.
much, guys.